Hey guys, thanks for joining me. And if you like what you see, please subscribe. Hello, peoples. Welcome to Sharp Ends. You might be wondering why I have so many knives on the table. It's because I'm going to attempt to talk about knife steel. And this is some of the examples of different kinds of knife steel I have here. Each one of these knives represents a different knife steel, if you will. And I've been trying to think about how to do this logically, and so I've kind of lined them up in a certain order to kind of talk about different aspects of these. If you're new to the knife world, you're going to be shocked that some knives are just so freaking expensive. And yes, some of it has to do with the marketing and the ergonomics and the limited runs and all that kind of stuff. But a lot of it has to do with what steel they decide to make the knife out of. And that can be that could just be really confusing. I know I was really confused when I first saw different knife steels. Some people were like, "Oh, I really want that knife because of the steel it's made out of." And then I kind of went down this rabbit hole of learning a little bit more about metallurgy. I should stay off the bat that if you're going to go down this rabbit hole, you need to check out Laren Thomas's website, YouTube channel called Knife Steel Nerds. He also has a really cool book out, which will be linked in the description, which I should highly recommend you check out. And he's the developer of his own steel called MagnaCut, which is kind of taking over the world right now, if you don't know that. First off, let's start with just a little bit of history, and I think the best place to start with that would be D2. This is an Ontario Rat Model 2 D2, so this is an R2 D2. D2 is a tool steel developed during World War II. What is steel? Well, steel is iron with a little bit of carbon in it, and a little bit of magnesium and a little bit of silicone. So, that's basically it. So high-speed tool steel, and Laren Thomas does a better job of describing this, but basically what this was made so that, and the high speed comes from you can make a die and you can use that die multiple times at high speeds and not have the heat of the cutting action affect the steel, and it can cut for a long time. D2 is still used today in a lot of budget models, and I don't think should be scoffed at. I think a lot of people do think, oh my God, at a certain price point, you shouldn't be necessarily charging that much for D2, and that's a valid argument. But just know that, that the certain percentages of different amounts of metals are put together, they're melted down in a crucible, and then they're made into a steel. D2, I think, is a fine steel and is still very usable. There's some budget knives that are coming out, like the Sencut Serene, which I just talked very highly of recently in a review. A perfectly fine, great entry-level knife, $46. This is an awesome knife. So D2 is still used regularly, even though it's an old steel. Moving on, there's other kinds of steel that are tool steels, all right? And this is a BD1N. This is made by Carpenter, I believe, CTS. This is a very nice steel as well, and there are other tool steels as well. I'm going to kind of skip over those, but I am going to move into talking about powder metallurgy. So Crucible developed a system. This is CPM. The CPM stands for Crucible, the C, and then PM stands for powdered metallurgy. What that means is that they take all the elements that make up the steel and they put it in very small little beads. And what that does is when they put that in the crucible and they melt it all down, you get a finer grain structure in the steel. And you can look at high resolution images and see that. So CPMD2 is an exponential step up in quality than D2 because the grain structure is finer. It means it chips less. At this point, I should point out that there are 4 different factors in steel. One is how long it'll stay sharp, how tough it is, in other words, how much you can bang it or how brittle it's going to be, how waterproof it is or how stainless it is, and how easy it is to sharpen. Those 4 things on a chart are kind of opposite each other, and you usually have to sacrifice one to gain another. There are some steels that do this better than other things. But that's basically it. What makes a knife stainless? Well, it's the chromium. Chromium, and I've done a lot of research on this. Some people say you only need 10% chromium, but D2 has chromium in it and it's not considered a stainless steel. Some people say above 13, something like that. So I would say anything above 13, 14% chromium is stainless. There's other elements in there that can have an effect on how long it stays sharp, how easy it is to sharpen, and how tough it is. Some knife steels are suited for different applications more than others, and I'll get into that a little bit more. I will now say at this point that there is an app that is free that you can find on all the Play stores called Knife Steel that is run, I can't remember the name of the guy, but it actually shows the charts and the percentages, and it's very useful, and it usually has a little write-up too. It's very basic, but it gives you the percentages of how much magnesium, palladium, chromium, all those things, all the things that you need to know to see how the knife steels compare is in there. And I highly recommend that you get it because it's free. And if you're getting into knives, you should just have it. It's called Knife Steel app. Just look it up. So then we get into the powder metallurgy, right? And that has taken a step up in the fine grain structure. This is 14 CR, so that's 14% chromium. And then it's like 4N, which is, I can't remember. Or 4M, which is magnesium. So it's stainless, and also it will stay sharp for a long time. This is the cubit, this CVV cubit. Then you start to get into things that are really, this is Van X, okay? And this is considered a super stainless steel. This has 20% chromium, and also because of, I think it's the vanadium content, it's also stays sharp a super long time. This is a really, really, really nice high-end steel. It's called Van X Super Clean, and this is a quiet carry knife with a hollow grind. It's really nice. And its liners are actually 200 CN, so its liners are actually made up of another very nice stainless steel called LC200N, which is most notably in the Spidey Chef. So yeah. Very cool. So when it has that much chromium in it, I have taken this to the ocean, and I've been in salt water nonstop for a long time, and come home after a week and open it up, absolutely no rust. Very, very cool. Also very expensive knife steel. This adds a lot of money to your basic knife. And I'm going to skip over this for a second. I'll come back to, there are sometimes when you get a Mora, right, or some of the low-end knives, they're going to either come in the carbon or the stainless version. The stainless version is going to have more chromium in it, and the way that they make it, they have to make it really cheap. It'll stay stainless, but it won't stay as sharp as long. The carbon version, which this is the carbon one, will in theory rust faster, but be tougher. And stay sharper longer. And yeah, so I usually, when I'm getting a cheap knife, I avoid the stainless version, because if I want something stainless, I'm going to buy something more high-end, and I stick with the carbon because this is a beater knife and I'm going to beat it, and I just want it to last a long time. There's three main companies that work on knife steels. There's Crucible, Carpenter, and Boiler. I'm blanking on the name. Those three companies make a lot of these knife steels, but under different names, right? And they call them different things. Again, the Knife Steel app will help explain that when you're figuring things out. One of the most popular examples is 20CV. 20CV has been the standard for knife steel for a very long time. It is very stain resistant. It's not the most stain resistant, and it has good qualities. It's fairly easy to, well, it's not easy to sharpen, but it's easier than super steels or things like 4V that have 4% vanadium or things like that, but fairly easy, stays sharp a long time, and has really been the gold standard for a long time. So 20CV, and it's a CPM, that's the Crucible version, I believe. And then you have M390, that's the same thing. It's the same thing. So M390, 20CV, and then Carpenter's version is 204P. They're all the same thing. Now, they are definitely, I can't remember what percentage chromium it has, but it's definitely stainless. but it's not the most stainless thing I've ever seen in my life. It's not like Vanex, okay? So some knife companies are going to have the same kind of knife steels, and you just need to be aware that what you're getting is the same thing. So if you're expecting to get M390 and you're like, oh my God, I can't believe this. They told me this knife was going to be made in an M390, but when you get it, it's stamped with, 204P CTS. You're like, I didn't get the steel that I wanted. Well, you did get the steel you wanted. You just got it manufactured from somewhere else. So sometimes when a knife maker is making a knife, they might run out of 20CV and they might substitute M390, and that's considered fair and legit in the knife world, just so you're aware. I'm going to talk about a couple of other steels that I think are pretty cool. There are some steels that are better for fixed blades. One of them is CPM 3V. There's also 4V, and there's a lot of different Vs. The V stands for vanadium, I believe. Makes it super tough. However, when you have a lot of vanadium in it, it usually means that it's not necessarily going to be stainless. So you're giving up some stainless properties in order to have the knife not chip and be much harsher and be able to baton and do those kinds of things better. So not necessarily a bad thing to have a fixed blade that is doing that. I'd just like to mention there's also things like 35. There's 20 CV, and then there was like a what is it called? 30 S35 VN. So originally there was I think it was S30, and then S35 VN, and then S45 now, and I believe that that's what Chris Reeves Knives uses. But though that was that first one that was made, I think it was S20 VN, was the very first knife steel actually made for knives, and that was back in the 90s. It was upgraded a couple of different times, and now the best version of that, it keeps getting upgraded, and S45 I think is a great one. And I'd just like to point out that I think S90V is perhaps my favorite knife steel, well, tied with MagnaCut, my favorite knife steel for a pocket knife. This will stay sharp forever. I actually think it's better than 20CV by a long shot. It stays sharp forever. It's sticky sharp. Not that much harder to sharpen. And honestly, it's not considered stainless, but it's super close. I just love it. I think it's an underrated steel. And if you see S90V in anything, you should pick it up. It's definitely a great, great steel. Next, I want to talk about MagnaCut. Well, let's talk about San Mayan laminates. I don't have much Damascus, but Damascus steels are things that two different kinds of steel put together and layered, and then acid etched so that one layer of the steel comes out versus the other. It's a process, and it's a look. You're getting it for the look in general, because the two different kind of metals are going to be made with two different kinds. Right now, 189 CTS 189. I'm blanking. I just said it before, but anyway, this is a laminate, and you can actually see the line in here. This is from Monterey Bay Knives. He uses this steel all the time. The center stuff here has a Rockwell hardness, super hard, and then the sheath above it is less hard and less expensive, but this knife will stay sharp forever. And I guess I should then go ahead and mention Rockwell hardness. Any of these steels can be good or bad depending on how they're heat treated. If they're heat treated badly, or the knife is made badly, then it's not going to be a good knife. A 20 CV that's only hardened to 59 Rockwell is going to be a crappy knife. Doesn't matter that the steel is good. This needs to be hardened to somewhere around 62. And that's just it. Some steels need to be hardened harder and some less. A D2 that's hardened to 59, absolutely fine. But then you have other things that are much, much higher in their rating, and they need to be, therefore, hardened to different degrees. And so the heat treatment matters a lot to all of these steels, and that's a big caveat. So we talked about the 3V. So we were talking about different laminates and stuff like that. That's just a look. And it's a, you know, so this center core here, I believe, is hardened up to 68 or 66. So super, super, super hard. Going to be really nearly impossible to sharpen. But then again, it's going to stay sharp forever. Some people like to cut corners with their hardening techniques. Spyderco never does. Spyderco does really good heat treat. And there's other knife companies that do really good heat treat. But some of the cheaper companies that deal with high-end knives are going to do a worse heat treat. And you should just be aware of that. Now, will you notice it? I don't know. You know, it depends on how much you use the stuff. Finally, I want to talk about MagnaCut. And I have a lot of MagnaCut in my life right now because I really like it. MagnaCut is technically not stainless. It doesn't have enough chromium, but it is a super steel, and it is stainless. It is almost as stainless as Vanex, if not just the same as Vanex. And that's because Laren Thomas, who runs the Knife Steel Nerds, has come up with a special concoction of different metals in the group 6 on the periodic table that basically provide the same kind of hardness as something that's really high up there, like 20 CV, but also stainless and also somewhat easy to sharpen, and it's just a super metal. It's a great metal, and it's taking over the world rightfully. So anytime you see MagnaCut on something, as long as it's hardened to somewhere between 62 and 64, and honestly, I think the sweet range for MagnaCut should be between 63 and 64, but most places are only hardening it to 61 to 62. You should go ahead and get it. I think it's good. If you're worried about specs, if you're looking online and you're looking at the knife specs, you start paying attention to the hardness rating. Go to the Knife Steel app and see what range of hardness they say is optimal, and just Google it too. So there's a reason to have every single type of knife steel that you can possibly imagine, right? There's a reason to have MagnaCut in your collection. It might not be as tough as 3V, but it's stainless and it's easy to sharpen, more easy to sharpen than 3V, right? So it's fine having a fixed blade in MagnaCut. There's also things like LMAX and a lot of other steels I did not cover. LMAX is a really cool steel too. Just know that the information's out there and that there's a reason why that knife steel is used. Some of the knife steels are made specifically for knives. Some of them are made for other applications and used by knife makers. But having an awareness of all this and starting to think about the percentages of the different elements that go into a knife steel can only benefit you in figuring out what knife you need to use in a certain situation. All right, I hope I didn't make a fool of myself in that video. That was a lot of talking and a lot of information, and I have to say that I am an amateur at this. But that is my basic knowledge for you if you are interested in starting to learn more about knife steel. So good luck out there, guys. Thanks so much for sticking with me, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye now.